Good morning. Today is apparently National Book Lover Day, or at least it is according to Amazon. So, with that being said, we've been kind of starting to work on these lists. Um, I know Sir Tonks is like 50 something of his favorite books of all time. And this is my top 100 books of all time, but it's basically novels, novellas, and children's books because I already did top 10 comic series, and then I did top 30 like plays and short story collections and graphic novels and nonfiction and memoirs and things that are not like novels. This is going to be a series because I'm not going to talk about 100 books all at once. So probably I am thinking it's going to be a 5-part series, so it'll be 20 at a time. I don't know if as I get further in, if I'm going to want to like break up the last like 20 into 2, but for now I'm doing 20 at a time. I don't own most of the books early or like on the early end of the list, so I somewhere around the middle I start to own more than I don't have, or right now I own them if they're on Kindle, so I don't have them available to show, so this will be kind of more of this format, but then eventually I'll have enough that I can show and you can kind of be a little more interesting. Sir Tonk I know is way more engaging than I am, so I don't know how long this is going to take me, but I figure I'll start part 1 and maybe a couple weeks for the next one, and try to get, before Sir Tonk goes back to school, maybe more of his stuff out there, since he is the one everyone wants to see anyway. But anyway, so this is my part 1. So it would be, I guess, 100 through 81 in order. And so I'm just going to go through them. So, like I said, it's part 1. I'm doing 2 at a time out of and up to 20 total. So it's going to be not a short video, but I mean, obviously, it's just the beginning. And these are the least, these are my least favorite. I mean, they're still in my top 100 books of all time, so they're pretty good. I like them. A couple of things, just a couple rules as to like how I decided. These are not like, you must read these. These are the best books of all time. These are going to change your life. These are my favorite books of all time. And so, obviously, I mean, I do care if it's well written. I do care if I like the story and engaged with the story. But one of the biggest factors for me is the impact the book has. And so it's really hard. So I'll have some new ones on here that I've read within the last year or two, and many of those are like lower on the list just because, I mean, there is a recency bias, but there's also the fact that, like, I don't know if 5 years from now I'll still remember what they were about. I kind of try to think about, there were books I really wanted to include, and then I was like, as much as I know I gave it 5 stars and I loved it, I couldn't even tell you like most of the character names. And so I was like, okay, I think there has to be something. I have to be able to remember something for it, to stand out over time. So again, these may not be the most literary. There are going to be some, I think that are well written, and I'll talk about that. But some of these books may seem weird, but for me, they're just books that really stood out to me, either on a personal level that I just really connected with the time when I read them emotionally, or it's just, years later I'm still thinking about them, because to me that's what a really great book does. It's a book that, either changes the way you look at things, helps you through a difficult period in your life, or brings you just absolute joy and entertainment. And it's something that's like a comforting, friend in the long term. And it doesn't mean they all have to be like lighthearted. I mean, you can have a terrifying book, but a book that sticks with you and that you remember, as you go through your life, that's when a book is good to me. All right, so moving in. So we have my first 2 are Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer. And this is funny because I loved this book, and I was, I remember crying a lot in it and being very emotional. But I don't, it's because it's literary fiction. it's not something I've gone and like reread a bunch of times. So that's why it's here at 100, because while I remember a lot of it, I remember more like the emotional impact of it. But it is about a family in New York and in 9/11, and but it's, you know, like over the years, like what kind of secrets do people hold, and who are people, and how do they sort of like, you know, how does a person, their identity change, you know, from this is who I am, you know, to me, and then, you know, as a husband or a spouse, or as a father, as a grandfather, because, you know, it's essentially looking at this family and all the different people in the family and how they interact, but also how they perceive one another. And, you know, I thought it was a really interesting look at, like, you know, you have this kid and he's looking at his grandfather, you know, in one way, and then other people, you know, like, think of him differently because he's somebody's dad too, and he's somebody's spouse, and he's somebody's friend, and he's someone's, you know, son back in the day, and I think it's a really interesting look. And then obviously, you know, the 9/11 thing, and I think what was nice about this is there haven't been a lot of like 9/11 books, and I think it's good because it's very easy to exploit that. Obviously, you have built-in emotion, but I thought this was really done well. Like, it wasn't like, oh, let's just throw 9/11 in. It was more about, you know, it was a pretty traditional, like, family literary fiction, but, you know, surrounded by this tragic event that kind of affects everyone. And so it became, you know, it goes from being like a personal family story to almost like everyone's story in some way. So very, very interesting book. Just, I remember just loving it, and, you know, being so emotionally impacted by it, and, you know, several times just remarking, you know, aloud to people when I was reading it of like how good it was. So again, it's been a long time, and it's literary fiction that I haven't gone back to reread, so this is why it's at 100. And then 99, I have the Wither Trilogy by Lauren DeStefano. This is YA sort of dystopian fantasy. I'm a total sucker for dystopian books anyway, but it's about it's essentially like a very Handmaid's Tale kind of deal, where these girls are married off, essentially, to be, you know, raised to have babies and to, you know, keep the men in power, and the covers are gorgeous too. But, I mean, I just really enjoyed it. I thought it did a really good job of, you know, hitting all, like, the right notes in terms of, like, dystopia. There, you know, there's feminism elements without being sort of like over the top. There was some romance, you know, because I don't think you're allowed to, like, for a period of time, you could not write a YA novel without having some romance. But the romance is, like, you know, considerate of the world it's in. And so, you know, I just thought she didn't, I mean, it's very easy, I think, in YA to, like, want to tone it down or to scale back or to not address certain things. And I thought she did a really good job of not sort of shying away from the sort of dark elements of this concept. And like I said, I love dystopian books, but, you know, essentially we're talking about sex trafficking, and, you know, it looks really pretty, but, you know, again, it's, the concept seemed great to the people running the society, but it's not great for the women being forced into, like, these marriages, and very, you know, pretty dark, but also I kind of appreciate that, you know, when people don't shy away from it just because they're like, oh, it's for a younger audience. I mean, it should still be what it is. And then the next book is With Malice by Eileen Cook, and, you know, I don't remember that much about this book, except for it's about these girls, and there's a murder, and it's set in Italy. But it's one of those books that, after I read it, I like traveled to Italy years after, and I kept picturing scenes from this book. And I was like, you know, what was the name of that book? And I couldn't remember the name of the book, but that I thought was pretty impactful. And it's, you know, it's a thriller, and I always like thrillers. Kind of like on the line of YA and adult. So, but I really enjoyed this, and, you know, like I said, it stuck with me for a long time. But again, we're, you know, low in the list. And then 97, I have Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I really love this story. I love everything about this story. I actually really enjoy most of the writing in this book. It's actually, it's beautifully written. There's a lot of depth to it. Obviously, it's like someone's whole life story. It's a coming of age story with really just awful people. A lot of things that are great about this book, but the reason it's down here at 97 or whatever is because the problem with Dickens is his writing is really good, but it's also, he, as we all know, he was like paid by the length of his work. And it's like when you read something like Christmas Carol, you're like, okay, this guy knew how to write when it wasn't like when he didn't have to just extend the story out. And so there are parts of this book that you're just like, okay, get to the point. I know you're getting paid, but like move it along. And it's not as bad as you did think for the length of the book. It was like 600 something pages. So it's not as bad as it could be. I mean, there is a lot going on. Again, it's like, 20 something years of this guy's life, actually probably 30. And there's a lot of plot, but I also just feel like what I always feel like with Dickens, and I don't have Tale of Two Cities on here, but Tale of Two Cities has probably the absolute best last few pages of any book ever. But the problem with Dickens is that while you're reading Dickens, you're not enjoying it, but then afterwards, you're kind of like, oh, there's a lot, like, except for Christmas Carol because it's short, but afterwards, you're like, oh, there's so much that I got out of that book. And I really enjoyed it, but, it's such a slog sometimes to get through, so that's why it's low, but I do really love this story, so, and I've always loved it. I don't know why. I think it's like, it still has some of that gothic element. Alright, and then we're moving to this is a children's book, but it's Make Way for Ducklings. I'm from Massachusetts. You're not allowed to be from Massachusetts and not love Make Way for Ducklings. The famous statue in Boston Common, or the Boston Public Gardens, the swan boats and all that. It's whole thing. It's a whole Boston thing. It's a cute children's book. I've read this a million times since I was a child, but yeah, I'm pretty sure. I don't even know, to be honest, I know nothing about, Robert McCloskey, if he's from Boston. I just know that, the duck statue is there in Boston. And so I feel like everyone is when you're born in the Boston area, somebody just shows up with a Make Way for Ducklings book, and that's it. It's just part of your life. So, and then the next one is Lamb, the Gospel According to Biff, Christ's Childhood Pal by Christopher Moore. And this is absolutely hilarious. But it's the actual story of the gospel, but then there's random breaks where they go off and do ninja training and stuff. But what I always find I found really interesting about Lamb is it's hilarious, it's obnoxious, but it's also very well written and very well I grew up religious, and I'm not anymore, and I'm not anti-religion, but I just feel like it's just, yeah, anyway, there's a whole lot there. But the thing, I always loved Jesus Christ Superstar, the play, and then this does the same thing where you kind of end and it's very sad, and you really do. I feel like Jesus Christ Superstar and Lamb do more for me in terms of making me emotionally invested in the story of Jesus than any years of church or Catholic school training or whatever they call it, CCD or whatever. Any of that has ever done for me. I just think because you're getting it from a story perspective, you really just relate in a way that you're oh, that's sad, and so it's actually a really heartfelt story, even though it's wrapped in a bunch of nonsense, and it's hilarious. So if you haven't read this used to be way higher on my list, and the only reason I knocked it down is because I haven't read it in so long, and I'm would I still love it as much? I don't know. But now I'm even debating if I should have moved it higher. So the next one is The Secret Garden, Frances Hodgson Burnett. And I always loved this story. This is kind of like, for some reason, I always mix this up with Jane Eyre when I was younger. And I think it's just because, it's kind of gothic. You've got the old creepy house. You have, like, the man who's, like, locked in his room and he won't talk to anybody. And it's got some of the turn of the screw elements, too, where, it's like everyone's angry. Like, no one will talk to anybody. But basically, it's about this young girl who's sent off into this, like, gorgeous mansion, and that, like, no one wants to talk to her because, like, I think it's, like, her grandfather, maybe, and her mother died, or it's her stepdad or something, and when her mother dies, so she's, like, abandoned because he's miserable and he's sad. And I can't remember now, because, like, part of me is like, isn't Maggie Smith in this, in the movie? And, like, so I mix it up with a lot of this, like, Victorian kind of people in a mansion type of movies and books. But, really it's just, like, about a girl kind of coming of age, and she finds the garden that belonged to her mom, or this woman, or whoever. I think it's her mom. And, kind of through that, essentially, like lifts this darkness off of this, like, home. But it's done in, like, a way that's not cheesy, and it's really hard to pull that off. I mean, it is a kid's book, but it's not written in a way that you read and you're like, if you read it now, you're not thinking, oh, this is for little kids. Like, it still holds up, and it's still a really interesting book. So, and the next is, like, a kind of overarching group, but it's the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew mystery series. Just because I was obsessed with these when I was a kid, and I would just go to the library and then, like, take out, like, 2 of each, and then go back and take the next 2. And that was just, I loved all of them. I mean, I honestly couldn't tell you what happens in any of these. I feel like they're, like, kind of generic now. But this was before And Then There Were None. So I always say, like, And Then There Were None was, like, my real entry into mystery. But I was reading mysteries, like, before And Then There Were None. And, like, I just always loved mysteries. I loved, like, the problem solving. I like the group of kids being sleuths. Like, it's just, it's cute. It's fun. Okay, so, sorry, I just wanted I'm testing this new, mic, and I don't know why everything, maybe I just naturally sound garbled, maybe I'm, like, possessed by a demon or something. So the next one, speaking of possessed by a demon, is Dracula. And honestly, the reason Dracula, and it's not low, I mean, obviously, it's still my top 100 of all time, I love Dracula. I don't know that I love, like, Bram Stoker's Dracula, like, I don't think what he thought he was writing ended up being what he ended up writing, because I know he was, like, terrified of women and terrified of sexuality, and, and so in his mind, I think he was writing a book about, like, the actual dangers of sexuality, and, with the vampire being the representation of female sexuality, but I do think, like, even though he effectively wrote about his own fears, I think, when you read it now, you're just like, wow, this person was so repressed, and the Victorian era was so repressed, and look how scared they were of, like, women being sexual, and so there's so much there, but again, like, I think there's so much there that I don't think he intended for it to be, like, almost, like, antithetical to his views, but it is. But the only reason, like, it's not really way high on my list, because I do love Dracula. I love epistolary writing anyway, but there's just that period after, like, and I mean, I guess this is a spoiler, but again, it's like a couple 100 years old or so, or at least 100 and something years old. And I always mix up Mina and Lucy. So Lucy's the one who gives in to her urges, and Mina's the one they have to preserve. So when Lucy becomes a vampire, and then, like, they go into I think it's Highgate, or one of the cemeteries, where they go and they pull her, open up her tomb, and she's got the, like, nightgown that's now ripped, and she's holding the baby, and then, like, she's trying to, like, get to, I think it's, like, Godalming, she's trying to get to one of her suitors, and she's, like, going to him, and, like, she sees him while she's, like, holding the baby, and then she's, like, literally tossing the baby over her shoulder to get to, like, Godalming, and, because she has to, and she's, like, ripping his shirt open, and, like, I mean, you can't be, this guy is like so not subtle. Like, I don't think he even knows what the symbolism he's doing, but it's like so great about like, oh, women, they're so, they have so much lack of control of their desires. They'll just throw babies away, just to get with the man. And so it's kind of hilarious. But after that, once all the guys decide that like Lucy is lost to them and there's nothing they can do, they like really, really like buckle down to like preserving Mina's honor because she's getting like slowly like attracted to Dracula. And like Harker's like, what do I do? My wife, she might want to have sex. And I mean, again, it's a vampire, but it's just not a vampire. Like, we all know what's going on there. But then there's this like pages and pages where like Mina shows up, and every time she walks into a room, the guys stop talking and they're like, you should rest, you look tired. And it's kind of like, it's like, it's not that long in the in the scope of the book, but it just feels like, all right, we get it. The poor weak woman's got to go to sleep so she can like control her urges or something. I don't know. The ending of this book is like hilariously obnoxious too. Like, where they're like, someday they'll know what the men sacrificed so they could preserve her honor. And I'm just like, oh my God, it's so ridiculous. But it's a great book. I mean, even if you're like, if you want to just read it for like the vampire book and be like, yeah, it's about vampires, and not like get into like obviously like what the Victorian fear of sexuality was, you can do that and it's fine, and it's a fun vampire hunting book, but there's like, it's so much fun to read with like the context of the like time period too, because you're just like, wow, they were just out of control. So speaking of Victorian, I also have the Infernal Devices series by Cassandra Clare, which is like, if you read Mortal Instruments, it's basically Mortal Instruments just set in London in like the Victorian age. All the steampunk stuff. I just like this series better than Mortal Instruments. One, I think the love triangle's like less, I mean, for lack of a better word, the love triangle's a little stupid, and not because of like, all the characters are okay, but like, I don't know, I just think Jace is like a little much. Where I feel like the characters in Infernal Devices, I just really, really like them all, and I'm like, I get, and then like, you've got the sad like guy who's got like consumption or whatever, I don't know, he's got some illness, and the girl is, like, just like, because she's, it's the time period, she's a little like fighting against the system, and I don't know, I love London. I love Victorian London. I love this time period. I love steampunk stuff. I like urban fantasy. So, like, I just really love this series. And, like, I kind of just got tired of reading them because I read, then I went back and I got the next 3 of the Mortal Instruments when those came out. And I was just kind of like, okay, I feel like I've been doing this over and over, and it's kind of redundant eventually. But I do really enjoy these 3. They're still really great, and I've read them several times, so. All right, so the next group of books, so this would be, I'm just trying to figure out where I am number-wise. So we have, so this would be 90 and 89. So I have Anna and the French Kiss by Stephanie Perkins, and actually this whole series, well, I didn't read Isla and the Happily Ever After, but I did read Anna and the French Kiss and Lola and the Boy Next Door, and those are really great. And I am not a romance reader. This is YA romance, and it's like cutesy YA romance. It's not, it's not spicy at all. That is not my thing. I get bored. And like, I'm not a prude at all, like, about it. I just find it so distracting. Like, I'm trying to read the story and like the character development, and then all of a sudden like people are ripping their clothes off, and I'm getting like anatomical like descriptions of like where people are putting things. And then I'm also getting kind of confused because like in like 50 Shades of Grey, like, I don't know how many thumbs this guy has, but he's like constantly putting thumbs in things. And then there's like, you're like, what is he doing? Is he like constantly moving his thumbs? I don't know. So I get very distracted by it, and I don't get distracted by it in like a pleasant way. I get distracted by it in like an irritated way where I can't, and I like lose all track of like what I'm reading. So anyway, so this is like a very cutesy, light, clean romance, but it's just about a girl who is going to an international school in Paris. I mean, I love that anyway. And then she falls in love, and there's a French boy, and it's just cute. And I mean, it says like, this is like, the lollipop, like, of, or like, just like candy of books. I mean, it's totally light, it's totally cute, but it's actually like well written enough that it doesn't feel like just like total garbage, where it's like, it's actually cute and sweet too. So, and then the Swiss Family Robinson, and I know I talked about this a while back, but like, I don't really remember a ton of it, I haven't read it since I was in like middle school, but I really loved it, and I just thought it was like, it was not the kind of book that was for me, and I ended up really enjoying it. So these are both examples of things that are like really outside my wheelhouse, and I enjoyed. And I think, that's always something that's interesting too, is when you can like take a type of book that you generally would not like. Like, I am not a romance reader. I'm not like an adventure people like building their, I don't know, city on a like deserted island. Like, no, neither of those are things that I generally am interested in. And I really enjoyed both of these books. So then the next group is Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which there was like this period in like YA fiction. You're gonna see a lot of my YA stuff is probably gonna be down here. I do like a lot of YA, but like eventually I just started getting kind of like tired of certain tropes. And there was this period of time for some reason that like, and I don't know if it was because of The Fault in Our Stars, or if it was a result of that, or if it just happened to be everybody was writing, but everybody was writing about like kids with cancer, and it was like a thing, or kids with like terminal illnesses. And I mean, and it's kind of sad, and everything, but it felt sort of like, I don't know, I just was like, are these writers like, do they have terminal illnesses? And I'm not saying like you should, but sometimes it felt like very like trying to force emotion out of teenagers, and I don't like that. Like, I feel like you should write like things that are a little more authentic, not just be like, oh, I'm gonna make people cry a lot. I'm not a fan of things to me that feel forced. And so what I really liked about Me and Earl and the Dying Girl is that like the Dying Girl is just kind of like a side character, and I mean, and that's intentional because it's about this guy. And yeah, she becomes a friend of his, but she's like, her illness is like basically her mom and his mom, like they knew each other as kids or something. And her mom talks to his mom and wants him to hang out with her because she's dying. And he's like, I want to go hang out with this dying girl. Like, I don't even know her anymore. Like, we knew each other in like second grade, and now they're in like high school, right? So like seniors in high school or juniors in high school, and they're like, he's like, I don't want to, like, she's not in my, like, friend group, like, she's been at, like, a special school because she was, she was sick, and I think she went to a private school, too, and so, you know how it is, like, when you're a kid, right, like, your parents are like, you know them, because we went to the same church or something, and, like, now you're friends, and you're like, I don't really want to be friends with this person, I haven't talked to them in 10 years, and so I thought it was really authentic, because, like, he's like, I don't want to hang out with this girl, and she doesn't want to hang out with him either, and so, like, it's really interesting because, like, they don't really get along. Like, he's going and doing these, like, visits that, like, because her mom feels like it will be healthy for her to, like, be around kids her own age who are healthy. And she's just irritated because she's like, hey, thanks for inviting this guy I don't talk to come and try to, like, make me feel like a freak because, like, I have, like, this terminal illness. And then he's like, I don't even know what to say. I don't know the right thing to say. I don't know her. I don't want to talk about this. And then Earl's his friend. But then they, like, form this really weird, like, awkward friendship, but that ends up feeling very real. And so then, like, her illness actually does feel really sad because, it's the kind of thing. But it's still kind of, like, she draws the attention to it because both he and Earl, like, the main character and Earl will get, like, really sad about her dying. And she's like, I'm the one dying. And you're acting like how it affects you, but, like, you never think about, like, how it affects me, And so she gets kind of mad at them a few times. And I thought it was I just thought this was, like, in this whole group of terminal illness kid books, like, I thought this one was way more authentic than any of the ones I'd read. And I didn't feel like it was trying to be, like, say the right things, or like, I thought it was a realistic representation of like what would actually happen. And I did think, I mean, yes, she's a side character, but I thought her representation was pretty good too, because like for her, you know, she's like, this is my story too, but you know, I'm just kind of like the catalyst, like, and she, you know, she calls out sort of the, I don't want to say it's like a manic pixie dream girl thing, but there is a tendency in some of like John Green's books to do that. And I liked that in this one. I felt like it was kind of calling out, like, using another person or their situation as like, I mean, he does end up writing his college essay about this experience, which is a little, but it's kind of done. I feel like it addresses it, you know, and I just thought this. So anyway, I thought this was a really good one, and it was like, it did become a movie, but it was like Fox Searchlight, and so like no one saw it. It has the girl, I forget, but the girl is in, it's in like a bunch of stuff right now. And she's good, and like the cast was really good, but I just thought this was the best one of that time period, and I feel like it was like underrated and kind of flew under a lot of people's radar because it wasn't the most popular one. So if you liked that kind of book, or even if you didn't, I mean, I would definitely check this out, because I thought it was just a little more, like I said, a little more realistic. And then speaking of completely not realistic, Roald Dahl's The Witches. I loved this book when I was a kid. I loved the movie. I haven't seen the new movie, although my husband got it for me for Christmas, so I do want to see that. But I just thought this was like a great, I mean, like anything with Roald Dahl, it's like coming of age told in the most like wacky way possible. So great book. And then so growing up, like I said, I don't really read romance, but growing up I read a lot of Danielle Steele, because when I moved up into the adult part of the library, it was like the 80s, you know, and so yeah, I would say it was like the late 80s probably, because I was like 11 or 12, and then like I read pretty much everything in the children's section, and so there was no YA, you know, for the record, until like the late 80s, early 90s, and I'll get to those in some later lists, but there was really no YA section for kids, you know, so it was like, you read Nancy Drew, you read Roald Dahl, you read those books, C.S. Lewis, and then you read them again until you were ready to go upstairs to the adult books. And so when I got up to the adult books at like, you know, 10, 11 years old, at the time, it was basically like a full room. The whole fiction section was Mary Higgins Clark, Danielle Steele, Dean Koontz, Stephen King, V.C. Andrews, and then like some like war books and stuff. And so I read all of those people. And so I read pretty much everything Danielle Steele wrote, and I went back and reread everything else she had written, and I would read all her new ones until about like the early 2000s. And then I just kind of was like, all right, these are starting to just be the same book over and over. But I will say, like, even though they're romance, I thought she at least tried to do something a little like beyond just being sappy romance. So it's like they would have like historical fiction, sort of major elements of historical fiction, or they deal with like, she's had some that deal with like trauma, or, you know, like domestic abuse. And I thought she at least tried to like not just have like, I mean, her early stuff is all like the same, but as she started, I thought she like was at least trying to branch out into new things. And so my favorite from her was Message from Nam. And I'm sure, you know, like, the thing is, like, I was born in the 70s, the late 70s. And so when I was growing up, like, you know, Platoon came out, and that was pretty much it. That was like what, and then you had like Full Metal Jacket and stuff, but like no one really wanted to talk about Vietnam, because like we had a lot of like my friends, their parents, their fathers might have fought in Vietnam, or their uncles, or like most of our grandparents had fought, you know, our grandfathers had fought in World War II. And so Vietnam was still very like fresh. Like one of my good friends, her father had fought in Vietnam, and he wouldn't talk about it, and like no one talked about it. And so, and we never got to it in school, like in history class. And so because it was like currenty, so we were like, we never had time. And I think, honestly, they didn't want to talk about it because, like, there were obviously there's a lot of issues, and there was, like, some, a lot of people didn't believe in the war, and so it was a whole thing that, like, no one really wanted to talk about. And I would ask my parents about it because I was very interested in the 60s, and I wanted to know more about, like, the protests and, like, even just, like, the way soldiers were treated when they came back, because I was like, but they didn't, and I was trying to, like, rationalize it, because, like, to me, I was like, well, you're anti-war, but, like, they got, like, most of them were, not most, but, a ton of them were drafted. They didn't even want to be there. And then, like, I just found the whole thing very interesting, and I didn't know much about Vietnam. And then, like, so I would, like, seek out anything I could to learn about Vietnam, and there just wasn't a lot. And then, like, obviously, as you get into the 90s, in the early 2000s, people start, like, it starts being a little removed for a lot of people, so we started getting more movies, you get more books. I read Things They Carried. I read all of, like, Tim O'Brien stuff later. But Message from Nam was, like, the first thing where I could, like, read something. And I'd seen, like, Miss Saigon. And, and so to me, I was just, like, I mean, I am sure, like, I have reread it a few times. But, again, it was still earlier. And I'm sure if I reread it right now, I'd be like, wow, this is, like, not only, like, cheesy, but I might be, who knows, maybe it's offensive, like, to, like, people who actually were there. But it was so, for me at the time, it was, like, the only thing I could get my hands on, where people were, like, talk about this war that happened, because it just no one would talk about it. And then again, they had, like, movies like Hamburger Hill, which I wasn't allowed to see at, like, 10 and 11 years old. So this was really a good way for me to, like, try to make sense of it. And again, I had friends whose fathers had gone to the war, and they, like, shut down if anyone said anything about Vietnam. And so it was really, and then my grandparents had a Vietnamese family move in next to them. And so I remember, like, there was a whole thing, and, people in the neighborhood were like, oh my God, we don't want the Vietnamese here because of, like, we're still mad about the war. And my grandmother, like, would invite them all over, and, she became friendly with them. And I just thought it was, like, it was so alien to me. And I'm sure, if you're, like, you're listening to this now, it's been, like, 40 years, like, this sounds like a whole other world, but, like, that was really what was going on in the 80s. And so, so this one really, like, meant a lot to me, because it was kind of my only way, and I mean, in some cheesy romance novel, but still. And then The Bell Jar, which is, Sylvia Plath, and it was my first exposure to Sylvia Plath. And then, I, at that point, read everything by Sylvia Plath, but I mean, I was an angsty teenage girl, and who had a lot of, like, stuff that was going on, and, I mean, I don't think you're allowed to be an angsty teenage girl with a lot of stuff going on if you haven't read The Bell Jar. Like, it's, like, a requirement to be an angsty teenage girl, and so, obviously, I read that. Alright, so moving into the last couple of this group, we have The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Animal Farm. And I mean, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the only Narnia book I read. I couldn't even, like, finish Prince Caspian. I remember I kept trying to read them when I was a kid. I'd keep going back, like, to the bookstore, and I'd buy them, and then I'd, like, go to Annie's Book Swap and, like, swap them for something else, usually some, like, cheesy horror novel. But, like, I don't know, I couldn't get into the other Narnia books, and I don't know why. But I did love Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I mean, I think, like, everyone who grew up in this time, and anyone who's read it, even, growing up now, it's just a great fantasy novel, I mean, I guess, like, now you're like, oh, it's a whole Christian allegory, and, like, I don't know, I'm sure that bothers some people, and, like, I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know it was about, like, Jesus, and that Jesus was the lion. Like, I had no clue that was going on. I was just like, wow, that's cool. They get to open a wardrobe, and then there's, like, a fawn, it's snowing, and, like, that was all I cared about. Like, I had no idea what was happening, that there was, like, allegory. Like, that was completely lost on me. We read it in, like, second grade in school, so, like, none of that mattered. I just thought it was neat that there was a whole world in this wardrobe. I was also very interested in the concept of a wardrobe, because, I mean, I think that's a British thing. Like, we don't have wardrobes here, or at least, like, people in my social class do not have wardrobes. And so, like, the idea of, like, opening this fancy, like, thing, and, like, in the back there being, like, all these, like, old clothes, and then in the back there being this door to a magical land, like, just was, like, I like thought all of Britain was just like a bunch of like portals to like magical lands at the time. Like when I was a kid, I like so loved everything English, and now I still love everything English. But I do think when I was a kid, I was pretty much convinced that like Britain was just like castles where people had wardrobes that opened into like fantasy worlds. And I mean, Harry Potter didn't help like that idea. And then Animal Farm, and I talked about this in a video previously about how like I hated Animal Farm because I had to read it in 8th grade, and I thought it was terrifying and weird and creepy. And again, it's coming with allegory. Like you can't teach allegory to 8th grade just because it's like, oh, it's short, they'll get it. No, like, I mean, the concept of allegory took forever to really, for me to get. And I was an English major. You know, like, you shouldn't be, like, forcing kids at, like, 11 and 12 to try to make sense of allegory. So, I mean, now I love it. You know, obviously I understand a lot of, like, about the Russian Revolution and, you know, about fascism. And so now when I read Animal Farm, like, I get so much out of it. It's beautiful. It's written really well. And it is a great, like, book because, I mean, on the, like, the allegory is great. And then on the surface, if you don't understand allegory, it's still really good because you're like, oh, these animals, they're weird. And the pigs are evil. And, but again, like, I do think, like, it was a bad choice to try to, like, get us to understand, like, the context. I mean, maybe if we had just read about it as, like, some animals, we might have enjoyed it more. And then, so my last two, so this would be, like, 82 and 81. Chaos Walking Trilogy, which is Knife and Never Letting Go. No, I can't remember the names of the books. I know Monsters and Men, and I can't remember, The Ask and the Answer is number 2. So I did not like the first book. I mean, I like the concept of the first book, but the dog dies, and I'm telling you this because it broke me. Like, I was very upset about the dog dying, and it's awful. He's like the main character, second main character. The main character can hear the dog's thoughts, and like you have to like hear his thoughts as he's dying, and he does it to sacrifice himself for the kid, and that's great, but like it was awful. And so when I finished The Knife Never Letting Go, I like one of my friends is a librarian, and so I would like borrow the books from like her, and then I would like go and visit her and just like, and so like I came back with this and I like threw it down at her. I was like, never ever give me something like this again. And then a few like I don't know, maybe like a month later, she was like, do you want to read the other Chaos Walking books? And I was like, no, I hate that book. And she's like, they're really different. And so I was like, fine. I mean, more dogs die, it can't get worse, right? But they are very different. The second and third books are really more about like war strategy. They're very dark. They're about like the things people do and like how corrupt people become, you know, and how like they'll like essentially like sacrifice everything to win. So I really do like this series. And I mean, you know, again, just the first book is worth reading, but just prepare yourself because you may need to like take a break before you can like deal with it. And I always, when like a horrible animal death is part of a book, if like it's a part of a book that I can like still recommend, you know, even without that, I always have to mention it because I don't want to be given a book and then not know that the animal's going to die. And so my last one here is The Forever King, which is Molly Cochran and Warren Murphy. And I read this in high school. We read Once and Future King and then The Forever King because we were, you know, for our summer reading, so like prep for Arthurian myths, and then we had to do like a Norse mythology like overview too. So it was a really interesting summer reading collection. But this is a really fun kind of fantasy novel where and apparently Robert Jordan really liked it. So I guess that means something for a lot of you. But basically it's like King Arthur is reincarnated into this kid, and I guess it's like the 80s or early 90s. And then this like FBI agent knows he's there, and I don't know if the FBI agent's like Merlin reincarnated or someone else reincarnated, but they know that like this evil group is after him because they like know he's Arthur, and they want to like, I don't know if they want to kill him or they want to use him for their evil. And like, I don't really remember all those like the weird stuff. I just remember it being like a fun sort of King Arthur that you would basically get all of the Arthurian legend. If all the main, you know, characters show up, but it was like in like a spy FBI like thriller, espionage kind of thing, action thriller. And so I just thought that was really cool, because I was like, I mean, I liked those kind of like fun, cheesy, action-y books. And then I really found mythology interesting. And so this was like, wow, you take like some of my favorite myths. And so, I mean, it's probably like the foundation of something that becomes like a Dan Brown book. It's better written, I think. But that same kind of concept where it's like really fun, action-packed story surrounded with all this like mythology and history. So, I mean, if you are a fan of Arthurian legends, like, definitely check this book out. I feel like it kind of, like, didn't, I don't feel like you never hear about it. And so it was a great book, and I remember really liking it and thinking it was a lot more interesting than The Once and Future King, which, again, The Once and Future King is, the sort of standard that you have to read if you want to understand Arthurian legends. But this was just more fun. You read like Once and Future King and you're like, all right, there's all the like encyclopedia kind of information. But this was like the same concepts, just in a way that I got excited to read. So anyway, that's part one. I will come back down the line. I don't know, probably be in like a week, maybe less, maybe more, probably more. So this is going to take a little while, but I do think, it's good. I really wanted to put this list together of just like overall my favorite books. And, I think, there's a tendency to be like, I feel like a lot of booktube is like, hey, there's 15 books on the planet. And so, there are a lot of other books. So go check some other books out if you haven't read them. I mean, and I'm just as much at fault. There's certain books that, like, they make sense. Everyone reads them because they're good. And then I think sometimes everyone reads them because of FOMO. And so, is it an organic, like, oh, everyone's reading this because this is a great book? Like, there's a reason everyone has read Narnia. There's a reason everyone has read, like, certain classics. But then there's other books that you kind of go, I mean, is everyone reading this? Just, is it really good? And I mean, I don't know, maybe, I mean, you could hate everything I like, and I could hate everything you like. So, anyway, so these are just my books. I don't know if you've read any of these, if you have any thoughts on any of these. And then there's another 80 to come. So, I will be back. And like I said, Sir Chunk has a more engaging, probably, look at his books. He's just more interesting than me. All right, so we'll be back soon. Bye.